The desperate plea. The sky burned a terrifying shade of red as flames consumed the alien city of Valoria. Buildings crumbled, their walls shaking from the powerful blasts raining down from above. Screams of panic filled the air as the Valorians ran for their lives, clutching their children and leaving behind everything they had ever known. The attackers showed no mercy. Ruthless and unstoppable, they were known as the Carvians, warriors without honor, conquerors of countless worlds. Their ships hovered above the city, sleek and black, firing beams of destruction that tore through the ground. Inside the grand hall of the Valorian High Council, fear and despair filled the room. Councillor Fiddler, the eldest among them, slammed his fist on the table, his blue skin trembling. "If we do nothing, our people will be wiped out." His words echoed in the chamber, followed by a heavy silence. The faces of the other councillors were pale with fear. They had never faced an enemy as powerful as the Xarvians. Councillor Myra stood up, her voice shaking. "Our defenses are failing. Our armies are outnumbered. We have no hope of victory." Her eyes glistened with tears as the building shook from another explosion outside. Dust fell from the ceiling. "What about the Galactic Council?" another councillor asked desperately. "They promised to protect us." Feller shook his head, bitterness in his voice. "They abandoned us. They said we were not worth the risk." A wave of despair washed over the councillors. They were truly alone. Their allies had turned their backs on them, leaving them to face extinction. Councillor Myra wiped her tears and stood tall. "Then we must send out an SOS. We will beg for help from anyone who will listen, even if it is a cry into the void. We must try." Feller looked at her, his eyes filled with doubt. Who would come to our aid? Who would risk their lives for us? Myra took a deep breath. There are legends, whispers of powerful beings out there. Beings who are feared throughout the galaxy. Feller frowned, realizing who she was talking about. "You speak of the Deathworlders." A shiver ran through the room. Even saying the name made the councillors uneasy. The Deathworlders were known to be the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. Their strength was unmatched, their technology far beyond anything the Valorians could understand. They came from a world so deadly that even their children were said to be fierce warriors. "They are monsters," another councillor whispered. "They fight like demons and conquer without mercy." Myra's eyes were firm. "Yes, but they are also honorable. They protect those who cannot protect themselves. We have no other choice." Feller's shoulders sank. He knew she was right. Their world was dying. Their people were suffering. They could not stand against the Targians alone. With a heavy heart, he gave the order. "Send the SOS. Send it on all frequencies. Let the galaxy hear our cry for help." The communication officers rushed to their stations, fingers flying over the controls. The message was simple yet desperate. "This is the planet Valoria. We are under attack by the Xarvians. Our people are dying. We beg for help, from anyone who will listen." The message echoed through the stars, a cry of despair reaching out to the vastness of space. It was a call for salvation, a last hope for survival. The councillors watched as the message was sent. A feeling of helplessness filled the room. Would anyone hear them? Would anyone care? Outside, the city continued to burn, and the skies were filled with smoke and fire. The ground shook as another building collapsed. The screams of their people echoed through the air. But as the SOS traveled across the galaxy, it reached ears that no one expected. Far away, in the dark depths of space, a fleet of colossal ships floated silently. Their designs were terrifyingly alien, covered in weapons capable of wiping out entire planets. Their hulls were marked with scars from countless battles. These were the ships of the Deathworlders, beings so feared that even the Xarvians avoided them. Inside the command ship, a figure watched the distress call with cold, calculating eyes, a human face hardened by war and survival. A face that showed no mercy but also no cruelty. The captain's voice was calm, almost emotionless. set a course for Valoria. The crew moved swiftly, their movements precise and disciplined. There was no hesitation, no fear. They were warriors from the most dangerous world in the galaxy. The engines roared to life, and the fleet began to move, cutting through the darkness of space. The Valorians had cried out for salvation, but they had no idea who was coming. The Valorian High Council waited anxiously. Hours had passed since they sent the SOS. Outside, the city continued to burn, and the Xarvian forces showed no mercy. Their brutal onslaught was relentless. Counselor Myra paced back and forth, her heart heavy with fear. Did anyone respond? Any signal at all? She asked the communication officer. The officer shook his head, his eyes downcast. No, Counselor. It seems no one is coming. Despair spread through the room. Counselor Thaler slumped in his chair, his face pale. Then, we are truly alone. A loud explosion rocked the building, making the walls tremble. Dust fell from the ceiling as the lights flickered. The Xarvians were getting closer. Their ships could be seen through the shattered windows, firing mercilessly. Counselor Myra closed her eyes, fighting back tears. She could almost hear the screams of their people, echoing through the smoke-filled air. She felt powerless, helpless. Had they truly been abandoned by the galaxy? But then, a beep broke the silence. A rapid, continuous beep. The communication officer's eyes widened as he stared at his screen. Counselors, we're receiving a signal. Hope sparked in Myra's heart. From who? She asked, her voice trembling. Is it the Galactic Council? The officer's fingers danced over the controls, his face turning pale. No, it's not them. It's... He hesitated, fear in his eyes. It's the Deathworlders. A cold chill ran through the room. The counselors looked at each other, their faces a mix of hope and terror. They had heard the stories, the legends of the Deathworlders, the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. Counselor Thaler's voice shook. Are you sure? The Deathworlders are coming here. The officer nodded. Their fleet is approaching at high speed. They'll be here within minutes. Panic rippled through the counselors. The Deathworlders were known for their unmatched power, their ruthless efficiency in battle. They were the galaxy's deadliest warriors, feared by all. Even the Xarvians avoided them. Counselor Myra's heart pounded. But they responded to our SOS. Does that mean they're here to help us? Thaler shook his head slowly. Or they could be here to conquer us, to finish what the Xarvians started. A heavy silence fell over the room. The counselors were torn between hope and fear. Would the Deathworlders be their saviors or their destroyers? Meanwhile, outside in the skies above Valoria, the battle raged on. Xarvian warships continued their assault, their weapons scorching the ground below. But suddenly, a shadow fell over the battlefield. A massive, terrifying shadow. The Valorians looked up, their eyes widening in shock. An enormous fleet had appeared, descending from the clouds like monsters from a nightmare. Their ships were massive, armored in dark metal with cannons that glowed with an ominous red light. The Deathworlders had arrived. Their fleet moved with terrifying precision, their formation flawless. There was no communication, no warning. They simply appeared, watching the battle below with cold, calculating eyes. The Xarvian commanders were stunned. They did not expect this. Their sensors struggled to scan the ships, the technology far beyond their understanding. Inside the Xarvian flagship, General Korvac's claws trembled as he stared at the screen. Those ships, they're humans. His voice cracked with fear. He had heard stories of the Deathworlders, of their unmatched power and brutal tactics. An officer beside him gulped. Yes, General. The Deathworlders, from the Forbidden World. Korvac's eyes filled with terror. Retreat. Order all units to fall back. But it was too late. The Deathworlder fleet began to descend, their weapons glowing as they locked on to the Xarvian warships. The Xarvians panicked. their formation breaking as they try to escape. But the Deathworlders were faster, more precise. Their ships moved with deadly elegance, surrounding the Ktarvian fleet. Inside the Valorian High Council chamber, the councillors watched the scene on the screens, their jaws dropping in shock. Councillor Myra's eyes widened. They're attacking the Ktarvians. Feller couldn't believe his eyes. Are they saving us? Myra's heart raced. Hope flooded her chest. Maybe, just maybe, they would survive this after all. But as she watched the Deathworlder fleet move, destroying the Ktarvian ships with terrifying ease, she couldn't shake the fear in her heart. The Deathworlders were not their allies. They were not saviors. They were something far more dangerous. They were monsters. And now, those monsters were here. The sky above the Loria was a chaotic battlefield. Sarvian warships tried to retreat, their engines roaring as they fled from the terrifying fleet that had suddenly appeared. But the Deathworlders were relentless. Their ships were unlike anything the Valorians had ever seen. Massive, dark, and menacing, covered in armor that seemed impenetrable. Their cannons glowed with a fiery red light, and when they fired, the blast was so powerful that it tore through Ktarvian ships like paper. In the High Council chamber, Councillor Myra stood frozen, her eyes glued to the screen. They're destroying them all. Her voice trembled with a mixture of fear and awe. Councillor Feller was equally stunned. I've never seen such power. Not even the Galactic Council's fleet could do this. On the screen, Sarvian warships exploded one by one, their wreckage falling like burning meteors. The Deathworlders moved with deadly precision, their formation tight and flawless. They showed no mercy, no hesitation. The Valorian communication officer spoke up, his face pale. Councillors, the Axarvians are sending distress signals. They're begging for help. From us. Myra's eyes widened. The Xarvians, merciless conquerors who had destroyed her people's homes, were now begging for mercy. It was almost unbelievable. Feller's voice was cold. Ignore them. They showed us no mercy. Let them face the monsters they woke. Outside, the Deathworlder fleet continued its assault. Their ships weaved through the battlefield with terrifying speed, dodging enemy fire effortlessly. Their weapons were unmatched, obliterating anything that dared to resist. General Korvac, leader of the Xarvian invasion, watched in horror from his flagship. His claws trembled as he saw his fleet being torn apart. Retreat, full retreat, he shouted, his voice shaking with fear. An officer replied, panic in his eyes. General, we're surrounded. There's no escape. Korvac's heart sank. He had heard legends of the Deathworlders, their ruthless tactics, their unstoppable power. But he never believed they were real. Until now. His ship shook violently as a Deathworlder cannon blast hit the hull. Alarms blared, red lights flashing as the damage reports came in. They were outmatched, outgunned, and outsmarted. Send a surrender signal, Korvac shouted. Maybe they will spare us. But there was no response. The Deathworlders did not answer calls for mercy. They continued their attack, cold and silent. Inside one of the Deathworlder ships, Commander Cole watched the battle unfold on his screen. His face was emotionless, his eyes cold as he analyzed the enemy movements. They're breaking formation. Push forward and end this, he ordered. His crew responded swiftly, their hands moving over controls with military precision. The ship surged forward, its cannons charging with a deadly red glow. Cole's voice was calm, almost detached. Fire. The ship's cannons unleashed a devastating barrage, the blasts ripping through the Xarvian flagship. The shields shattered, and the hull exploded in a fiery blaze. General Korvac's last moments were filled with fear and regret. He realized too late that his enemy was not just powerful, they were merciless. His ship was torn apart, consumed by flames. The Valorians watched in stunned silence as the Xarvian fleet was annihilated. Not a single enemy ship was spared. The Deathworlders had wiped them out completely. Counselor Myra's hands were shaking. They destroyed them all. Thelur looked pale. No survivors, no mercy. These Deathworlders, they're monsters. But as the battle ended, the Deathworlder fleet did not leave. Their ships hovered above Valoria, their cannons still glowing, aimed at the planet below. Panic surged through the council chamber. Are they going to attack us next? One counselor asked, his voice trembling. Myra felt cold fear grip her heart. They had hoped for salvation. But instead, they were now at the mercy of beings far more terrifying than the Xarvians. The communication officer's voice broke the silence. Counselors, we're receiving a transmission. It's from the Deathworlders. The screen flickered, and a figure appeared. A human, his face cold and expressionless, his eyes sharp as ice. His voice was calm, but it carried a chilling authority. "This is Commander Cole of the Deathworlder fleet," he said. "Your enemies are defeated. But now, you will answer to us." A wave of fear washed over the counselors. They had called for help, and the Deathworlders had answered. But at what cost? Myra's heart sank as she realized the terrifying truth. They had been saved from one enemy, only to face another far more dangerous. What did the Deathworlders want? Would they conquer Valoria, or did they have another purpose? As the screen went dark, and the Deathworlder fleet loomed ominously above the planet, one thing was clear. The nightmare was far from over. The air in the council chamber was heavy with fear. The image of Commander Cole, his cold eyes staring down at them, lingered in everyone's mind. The Valorians had called for help, but now they stood before the most terrifying beings in the galaxy, the Deathworlders. Counselor Myra tried to steady her shaking hands as she spoke. "Open a communication line. We need to hear their demands." The communication officer's fingers trembled as he pressed the controls. The screen flickered, and once again Commander Cole appeared. His expression was unreadable, his eyes sharp and calculating. "This is Commander Cole." His voice was calm, but it carried a weight of authority. "Your enemies are no more. The Xarvian fleet has been destroyed. You are safe. For now." A shiver ran down Myra's spine. For now. The words echoed ominously in her mind. We thank you for your help," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You saved our people. But why? Why would you help us?" Cole's eyes narrowed. "Help you?" He almost seemed to laugh. "We didn't do this for you. We did it because the Xarvians were a threat to our territory. Their presence was inconvenient." Counselor Thaler's fists clenched. "So, you did this for yourselves, not out of mercy." Cole's expression remained cold. "Mercy? You called for salvation. You got survival. Be grateful." Myra felt a chill run through her. These Deathworlders were not heroes. They were warriors, conquerors who fought on their own terms. But now that the Xarvians were gone, what did they want? She took a deep breath. "You destroyed our enemies. What do you want from us now?" Cole's eyes darkened. "Simple. Loyalty." A stunned silence filled the chamber. Myra's heart skipped a beat. "Loyalty? To you." Cole's voice was firm. "To the Deathworlder Dominion. Your world is under our protection now. In return, you will provide resources, intelligence, and obedience." Theller's eyes flared with anger. "You want us to become your servants." Cole's gaze was icy. "I suggest you choose your words carefully. You asked for help. We answered. Now, you owe us. That's the way of the galaxy." Myra's mind raced. They were trapped. The Deathworlders had saved them from annihilation, but now they demanded loyalty in return. Did they have any choice? Theller slammed his fist on the table. "We won't be slaves." Cole's eyes narrowed. "Slaves? No. Allies. But make no mistake. Defiance will be met with consequences." The screen shifted, showing the Deathworlder fleet above Valoria. Their cannons were still charged, aimed at the planet below. A clear warning. Myra's heart pounded. If they refused, the Deathworlders could destroy them just as easily as they had the Xarvians. But if they accepted, they would be submitting to an even greater power. She looked at Thaler, his face tense with anger. She knew he wanted to fight, to resist, but she also knew it would be suicide. The Deathworlders were unstoppable. Turning back to the screen, she forced herself to stay calm. What would this alliance require? Cole's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. Your resources, your technology, your loyalty. In return, we protect you from any who dare to threaten you. No one would dare attack a world under Deathworlder protection. Myra knew he was right. Even the powerful Xarvians had been destroyed effortlessly. Under the Deathworlders' rule, they would be safe. But at what cost? Thaler's jaw tightened. And if we refuse? Cole's eyes turned cold. Then you'll face the same fate as your enemies. The screen showed the burning remains of the Xarvian fleet, drifting lifelessly in space, a grim reminder of the price of defiance. Myra's heart sank. They were out of options. To resist would mean the destruction of Valoria. But to submit meant losing their freedom. She looked around the chamber, seeing the fear in every face. Her people were terrified, desperate for safety. But safety under the rule of Deathworlders, was that truly salvation? Cole's voice cut through the silence. Your choice, counselors. Surrender and live, or resist and face extinction. The screen went dark, leaving them in stunned silence. The Deathworlder fleet continued to hover above, their weapons ready to fire at any moment. Myra's hands trembled. She had never felt so powerless. They had cried out for salvation, and now they were at the mercy of beings far more terrifying than they could have ever imagined. The question hung heavy in the air. What price were they willing to pay for survival? Would they bow to the Deathworlders or die fighting? The choice was theirs, and it was the hardest choice they had ever faced. The council chamber was filled with tension. The Deathworlders' demands echoed in everyone's minds. Loyalty, obedience, surrender. Councillor Thaler's fists were clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. We can't bow to them. They're conquerors, not saviors. Councillor Myra's eyes were heavy with worry. But if we refuse, they'll destroy us. You saw their power. We can't fight them. Thaler slammed his fist on the table. Better to die free than live as slaves. Voices rose in agreement and opposition. The council was divided, torn between fear and pride, survival and freedom. Elder Veron's voice cut through the chaos. Silence. His old eyes were filled with sorrow. We must think carefully. Our people's lives are at stake. Thaler's face was flushed with anger. So, you suggest we just surrender? Let them rule over us. Veron's shoulders sagged. I suggest we survive. If we resist, we face annihilation. If we submit, perhaps we live to fight another day. Myra's voice trembled. We called for help. Now we owe them. It's the way of the galaxy. We have no choice. Thaler's jaw tightened. No choice. There's always a choice. We can fight. Myra looked at him sadly. Fight. With what? Our fleet was destroyed by the Xarvians. Our defenses are shattered. We don't stand a chance against the Deathworlders. Thaler's eyes burned with defiance. Then we fight to the last breath. Better to die standing than live on our knees. A murmur of agreement ran through the chamber, but there were just as many faces filled with fear and doubt. Veron stepped forward. And what of our children? Our families? Will you let them be slaughtered because of your pride? Thaler faltered, his defiance wavering. I don't want them to suffer, but submitting to the Deathworlders, it's a fate worse than death. Myra's voice was pleading. If we comply, we live. Our people survive. Isn't that worth sacrificing our pride? Thaler's shoulders sagged, his anger fading into despair. But at what cost? Our freedom, our dignity. Veron's voice was heavy with sorrow. Freedom is meaningless if we're all dead. Perhaps survival is the greater victory. Silence fell over the chamber. The weight of their decision hung heavy in the air. Surrender or resist. Live as subjects or die as heroes. Myra's eyes were wet with unused tears. I don't want to bow to them, but I can't let our people die. Thelor looked at her, his gaze softening. Neither do I. But I also can't stand the thought of living under their rule. Veron's voice was calm and steady. Then we must be wise. Perhaps we appear to comply, but secretly we prepare. We gather our strength. We wait for the day we can rise up and break free. Myra's eyes widened. Pretend to submit, but plan for rebellion. Veron nodded. It's better to live as prisoners with hope than to die as free men without a future. Thelor's fists unclenched, his defiance slowly turning to resolve. So, we play their game. We bow our heads, but never our spirits. Veron's eyes gleamed with determination. Exactly. We buy time. We protect our people. And when the time is right, we strike. A spark of hope flickered in Myra's heart. It was a dangerous plan, but it was better than extinction. She looked around the chamber, seeing the fear, the doubt, the pain, but also the hope, the will to survive, the courage to fight, even in the shadows. Her voice was firm. Then we choose survival. We submit, for now, but we will never stop fighting. Not until we are free. Thelor's eyes were fierce. Agreed. We bow today, so we can rise tomorrow. The council stood together, united by a common purpose. They would live. They would endure. And one day, they would reclaim their freedom. As they prepared to give their answer to the Deathworlders, one thought echoed in Myra's mind. This was not the end. It was only the beginning. The beginning of their rebellion. The beginning of their fight for freedom. The council chamber was silent as Elder Veron stepped forward, his face etched with determination. The Deathworlder commander's image flickered on the holoscreen, his cold eyes waiting for an answer. Veron's voice was steady, but his heart raced. We accept your terms. A murmur ran through the council members, some faces pale with fear, others tight with anger. But no one protested. They had made their choice. The Deathworlder commander's lips curled into a smile. Wise decision. You live for now. His gaze was piercing. But remember, disobedience will not be tolerated. Veron's jaw tightened, but he bowed his head. We understand. We will serve. The commander's image vanished, leaving a heavy silence. The decision was made. Their fate was sealed. Councillor Thaler's fists were clenched, his shoulders trembling. We've sold our souls to monsters. Myra's eyes were red, but her voice was firm. We've saved our people. We live to fight another day. Thelor turned to her, his eyes blazing. Fight. We just surrendered. We've given them everything. Veron's voice was low, but sharp. No, we gave them our words, not our loyalty. Thelor's anger faltered. You mean? Veron's eyes were cold, his face hard as stone. We comply. We follow their orders. But in secret, we prepare. We gather our strength. We wait for the right moment. Hope flickered in Thaler's eyes. A rebellion. Myra's voice was a whisper, but filled with resolve. We'll be prisoners, but prisoners who still have hope. Veron's face softened. Better to live and fight in the shadows than to die in the light. Thelor's fists unclenched. We bide our time. We endure. And when the time is right, we strike. Veron nodded. Exactly. The Deathworlders think they've broken us, but they've only made us stronger. Myra's eyes gleamed with determination. They've united us, given us a purpose. They may rule us today, but tomorrow we will rise. Thelor looked around the chamber, seeing the fire in each counselor's eyes. They were no longer divided. They were one. One people, one purpose, one rebellion. Varam's voice was steady. Then it is decided. We pretend to submit. We play their game. But in our hearts, we remain free. Feller's voice was fierce. We bow our heads, but never our spirits. Myra's heart pounded with hope. For our people, for our freedom, for our future. The council members placed their hands over their hearts, a silent oath of loyalty. Not to the Deathworlders, but to each other. They would survive. They would fight. They would win. As the chamber doors closed, Varan's words echoed in the silence. This is not the end. It's only the beginning of our fight for freedom. Weeks passed. The aliens did as they were told, following the Deathworlders' commands without question. Factories buzzed with activity, ships were repaired, resources were harvested, all sent to the Deathworlder fleet. From the outside, they looked like obedient subjects. But beneath the surface, rebellion was brewing. Varan moved through the underground tunnels, his steps light, his eyes sharp. The meeting was about to begin. They had to be careful. The Deathworlders watched everything. Spies were everywhere. He entered the hidden chamber, the door sealing behind him. A dozen faces turned toward him, eyes burning with determination. Myra stood at the front, her voice steady. All groups are ready. Supplies have been gathered. Weapons are hidden in safe places. We're prepared. Feller stepped forward, his jaw tight. They don't suspect a thing. They think we're broken, that we've accepted their rule. Varan's lips curled into a grim smile. Good. Let them think that. The longer they believe we're defeated, the stronger we become. A young soldier, his face full of hope, asked, "When do we strike?" Varan's eyes were cold, calculating. Not yet. We wait for the right moment. Patience is our weapon. Feller's fists clenched. But how long? Every day they take more from us. Our people are suffering. Myra's voice softened. I know, but we must be smart. A single mistake, and everything we've built will be destroyed. Varan's gaze was hard. We strike when they least expect it, when they're overconfident, when their guard is down. Myra's eyes gleamed with determination. Until then, we gather strength. We learn their weaknesses. We wait. And we endure. Fowler's shoulders relaxed, his anger turning into resolve. We'll play our part. Obey their orders. Smile when they demand it. Varan's voice was firm. Yes, we are shadows, unseen and unheard. But when the time comes, we will roar like thunder. A murmur of agreement spread through the chamber. Each face was set with determination, each heart burning with the fire of freedom. Varan looked around, his voice strong. They think they've won. They believe they control us. But they've only united us. They've turned our fear into fury, our pain into purpose. Myra's voice rose, filled with passion. They see us as weak, but we are stronger than they know. We are survivors, fighters, rebels. Feller's fists tightened. We are not defeated. We are waiting. Varan raised his hand, a spark of hope in his eyes. And when we strike, we will shake the stars. The chamber erupted in silent applause, fists raised in defiance. They were no longer just survivors. They were warriors. Warriors with a mission. Varan's voice echoed in the room, a promise of what was to come. For our people, for our freedom, for our future, we fight. Eyes blazed with determination. They were ready. They were united. They were unstoppable. The rebellion had begun.